On April 2nd, 2020, something strange happened in Birmingham, England. An irate mob suddenly took to the streets and began setting fire to wireless towers. These sort of incidents began to happen elsewhere in England, and before long the police recorded dozens of acts of vandalism and arson against wireless towers. The technicians who also worked on these towers reported over 80 cases of harassment. The reason for these incidents was an internet conspiracy about the origin of COVID-19 and how it was linked to the 5G technology. Over the next 2 years or so, this theory would gather momentum and become widely believed, despite the best efforts of experts to disprove them and assuage the fears of people. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at this conspiracy theory and outline the evidence for it. We'll also be outlining the evidence put forward by experts that want to debunk this theory. If you love videos like this, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe buttons. 2020 was a momentous year in human history. Humans had seen other airborne diseases that were easily communicable, but this was the first time we were meeting a new one in the 21st century, and its name was COVID-19. The worst thing about COVID-19 was that it had access to airports, cruise ships, super-speed trains, and relatively cheap travel. It meant that the disease could be in Wuhan today and be in 500,000 other places tomorrow. The fact that the virus could spread without the carrier being sick made it even more powerful. It was like a supervillain whose biggest strength was superhuman speed. That's why when the disease was discovered in Wuhan in early 2020, it covered the world in 2 months. This was despite national governments imposing travel bans on flights from Asia. The disease had left Wuhan even before the first case in China was discovered. In some ways, the travel bans were an attempt to unbreak a broken pot. The speed of COVID-19 took everyone by surprise. It was so shocking that people began to come up with interesting theories about how it spread. Many people just couldn't believe that the disease could spread so quickly and so rapidly without the government being behind it. And that does make some sense in a way. COVID-19 was unlike anything anyone had ever seen, and the exponential growth of cases made even the most rational person start doubting everything they knew. The fact that national governments insisted on lockdowns and other measures that seemed dystopian made the paranoia among people grow even more. This paranoia gave birth to a bundle of conspiracy theories concerning COVID-19. The gist of these theories was that the government was behind the virus and, at the same time, it was being caused by 5G towers. The bit about 5G towers didn't just start with COVID-19, it started a long time ago. 5G towers have been opposed for different reasons, but the pandemic helped people who opposed them to focus their grievances through a specific claim. The claims about 5G towers causing COVID-19 spread through the internet like wildfire. The theory gained even more publicity when certain medical practitioners seemed to be endorsing it. The people who pushed the claims and believed in it aren't all deluded, and some of them do base their belief on what they think is an accurate scientific finding. In the early 2000s, a physicist named Bill P. Curry published research that found that the brain's tissues absorbed microwaves from wireless networks. To prove this, he produced a chart that showed the dose of radiation received by the brain increasing as the wireless network got stronger. The slope started off gently, but as the frequency approached that of computer networking, it shot straight up. That study has been the basis of many theories that argue that 5G technology is unsafe and, more recently, is the cause of COVID-19. However, this graph is false and is a misrepresentation of Curry's findings. Curry carried out the study by exposing isolated brain tissue to radiation in a lab environment and then measured the level of radiation in the tissue. But that's not how electromagnetic radiation works in real life. The human skin is a shielding barrier, so whenever the body is exposed to high frequencies of radiation, the skin blocks it. Unfortunately, the tissue that Curry tested didn't have human skin on it, so the results he recorded were misleading. The sun, for example, gives off a higher level of electromagnetic waves, but since our skin blocks it, it doesn't affect us. You may wonder why a scientist wouldn't know something so obvious. Well, Dr. Curry's expertise is in physics and electrical engineering, not biology. Since he isn't an expert in biology, it was easy for him to overlook something as basic as the fact that the human skin shields us from UV rays. Before Curry's work could go through scientific review, the conspiracy theorist community had seized on his mistaken findings. Those mistakes have gone on to fuel 2 decades of conspiracy theories against wireless networks like 5G and are the foundation of the claim that 5G towers caused COVID-19. However, that's not the only count upon which 5G theory fails. The 5G theory claims that COVID-19 was caused by radiation from wireless towers, but that's impossible since COVID-19 is a virus that spreads through human action. Thousands of hospitals all around the world have reached this conclusion independently, so it's hard to argue that it's a conspiracy theory. If it were, it would require the participation of millions of doctors and lab technicians around around the world, that's not how conspiracies work. The speed of COVID-19 spread and the paranoia it brought made people wonder how the disease could spread so easily. And the answer for conspiracy theorists was that it was being spread by wireless towers that happened to be everywhere. The logic is awful because the premise, which is that waves from 5G towers are harmful and can cause viruses, is wrong. Unfortunately, this conspiracy, despite being objectively false, was able to spread through the internet faster than the arguments countering it, and that happened for a good reason. A lot of celebrities like Carrie Hilson and Wiz Khalifa on the internet with millions of followers amplified the theory. The fact that many people have a perhaps justified distrust of governments made the conspiracy spread even faster. The speed and severity of lockdown ordinances and the dystopian measures put in place to combat COVID-19 also made many people who wouldn't ordinarily fall for conspiracy theories fall for it. Another factor that made the conspiracy seem plausible to sensible people was some arguments that the conspiracy theorists were making. At the beginning of the pandemic, Italy was the most affected Western nation. People who spread the theory argued that the reason Italy was the most affected was because of a recent rollout of 5G in the country. But that wasn't the whole truth, as other countries had rolled out 5G at around the same period, but didn't have the same infection rates. Unfortunately, the 5G conspiracy theory didn't just stop at claiming that the virus was caused by 5G towers. Proponents of the theory also claimed that the government was behind both the 5G rollout and the virus. This claim is quite difficult to counter because of how nebulous it is. People who make this claim usually don't mention a particular government. Sometimes they refer to a particular country's government, and other times they say the virus is the invention of some world government. This claim makes no sense, even if we assume that national governments do sometimes engage in top-secret operations that citizens may not agree with. For one, COVID-19 didn't benefit any country at all. It slowed down the economies of America and China, and it was even one of the reasons Donald Trump lost his election. People who push the government theory sometimes say that lockdowns were simply a way for the state to control people, but that argument falls apart when one considers the logistics of it. Did all national governments come together to create COVID-19 to control people? If they did, why? Many countries only had lockdown policies for a few months and never went back. What would be the rationale for countries to do that, even if they did? Secondly, the logistics of this claim don't even make sense. For COVID-19 to have been invented by national governments or a world government, more than 1 million people must have been in on it. World national governments cannot even cooperate to do something as easy as fund the UN. But somehow proponents of this theory think that they all colluded to spring COVID-19 on the world's population. It's extremely implausible. However, the fact that some governments, like the American government for example, were very shifty with some details of COVID-19 made things even easier for this conspiracy to spread. For example, when the virus first broke out, the government refused to admit that it may have come from a research center in Wuhan. Instead, they claimed that they knew for certain that it came from the markets in the area. Of course, a lot of people didn't believe this since it was just too convenient. And who can blame them? It's hard to tell the story that COVID-19 originated in a city that had a lab studying COVID viruses, but somehow the virus itself came from markets, not the lab. What made things worse was that a lot of accomplished scientists who questioned this certainty were ostracized and suspended from Facebook and Twitter. The official government message was that the lab leak theory was pushed by racists who just wanted to inflame anti-Chinese sentiment. While that may be true, it's also true that some of the questions proposed about the theory were done in good faith. Unfortunately for the US government, the lab leak theory turned out to be plausible, even if yet unproven. In February 2023, the American Energy Department concluded that an accidental lab leak was what introduced the virus to the human population. Although this conclusion was made with low confidence, which means that the evidence isn't too convincing, it emboldened conspiracy theorists who believed that the government was the one behind COVID-19. But that theory doesn't hold water, as confirmation of the plausibility of the lab leak theory came from the government anyway. If the government truly was behind COVID-19, why would the Energy Department even say that the lab leak theory was plausible? This proves that the government seems to be reacting to new evidence, not playing out a script it devised on its own. Understandably, people may not trust the government due to its history of telling some half-truths, but that doesn't mean that every conspiracy theory about government action is true. The COVID-19 conspiracy theory in particular makes very little sense when the specifics are considered. The internal logic of the theory is incoherent, and the premise it rests on is quite faulty. If you enjoy videos like this, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe buttons. Make sure to turn on the notification bell as well. Goodbye.